This is a first time for the Deliver Only cast that we go travel around Ontario featuring small beers and small craft brews. Now today we're going to talk to you about some pretty awesome beer and going to see how things roll. So let's get at her. Cheers. Today I'm here at Haven Brewery, located in the heart of Peterborough, Ontario. Caught up with the co-owner Nathan Anker to learn about what makes Haven unique from other local breweries.
So we at Haven Brewing Company are just focused on making beer as accessible as possible. We focus on traditional European style beers that are easy drinking, so there's a beer here for everyone. So of course we have a tap room here on site, which surprises a few people. A lot of people think that we're just a production facility. With that, yes, we do produce all of our beer right here on site. We package it on site, we have our own warehousing, but we have a tap room where we want everyone to come, enjoy, and spend a little bit of time with us.
Next up, Nathan takes me into the brew house, where he introduces me to his brother and Haven brewmaster, Andrew. So tell us about the process. What goes on in the...
I'll give you the quick Coles Note tour.
Yeah, man.
So our mill's in the back there, but the grain comes, and over here we have the two vessels. So this is the mash lauter tons over here, and this is the kettle. So the grain is mixed in there with water. The Coles Note version, water converts the hot water converts the starch in the grain to sugar. Then we use the grain itself as a filter bed, separate the liquid from the grain, transfer it to the kettle. So then it's just sugar water in there, bring it to a boil, add the hops at different times to get the different flavors, then run it through the heat exchanger to the fermenters and add yeast, and then it ferments. And basically beer is sugar water, the yeast eats the sugar and creates alcohol and CO2.
Wild. And does the water need to be a specific way, or is it? I've heard rumors where people use well water that it's because it's sweeter, but I don't know if it's true.
It makes a big difference. So a lot of breweries actually do water treatment. We used to have an RO system. Right now we just have a charcoal filter because the water here in Peterborough is pretty good, but even season to season it changes because in the fall all the leaves hit the water, they start to decay, and then the city, in treating the water, just dumps a bunch of chlorine into it to clean that out. If you're brewing on a day where all that chlorine's coming in and you're not putting it through a proper filter, your beer is going to taste completely different from what it would have tasted like maybe even a week ago.
Making good quality beer is clearly an extremely delicate process. You can really start to see the passion it takes to make something like this.
It's kind of like kombucha is the way that I explain it to people.
It's the natural.
A lot of people, they'll see our bottles and it has like the sediment at the bottom because we do the bottle conditioning, and they say, oh, what is this? It's kind of gross. For us more purists, we just mix that back into the beer, let it be nice and cloudy, and we drink that. It's extra protein, it's extra flavor, and
all kinds of vitamins, like vitamin C, calcium. Like, beer is the reason people in the Middle Ages didn't die of...
Well, and they couldn't drink the water.
They couldn't drink the water because there's bacteria in it, and it's the reason they didn't have scurvy. It's all it provided all kinds of nutrients that they didn't understand at the time that helped them survive.
Yeah. I've been trying to convince him to brew me this beer that some of the Trappist monks would make that was had extra protein and extra carbs in it for when they did their 40-day fast and were basically not eating anything. They just
so it's
drank
heavy,
this beer.
Thick.
Yeah. So
really?
That sustains you. So you don't need meals anymore. You just drink this beer and you're good to go.
Gotta be a Trappist monk. You're gonna shave your hair.
It wouldn't quite work.
Fry your tuck, usually. That'd be sick.
I don't think that would look very good.
No. It wouldn't be a brewery tour without having a beer straight from the fermentation tank.
There you go.
Thank you, sir. Enjoy.
That's our Belgian blonde. It's been aging in the tank, which is why it's so damn clear.
It's delicious.
It's very nice.
But not really carbonated yet.
Yeah, it's still flat.
It's got a little bit of natural carbonation, but
When does the carbonation usually kick in?
so there's two different methods of doing carbonation. You have your forced carbonation where you're just using a tank that you have full of CO2 and you force that into the tank.
Through a carbonation stone, which is just basically a cylinder with a bunch of really little holes in it to create bubbles.
So then that forced
surface
carbonates
area.
into the beer, and that takes maybe 2 days. You can do it pretty quick if
You
you
can do
need
it in a matter of hours if you really need to.
Yeah. But what we do for most of our beers, especially our bottled beers, is we bottle condition it. So instead of doing the forced carbonation, we do it the natural European way where when we bottle it, we add a little bit more sugar and some yeast to it. And then it has a secondary fermentation in the bottle, which, as we said before, creates alcohol and CO2. So it self-carbonates itself. And the nice kind of side effect of that is in that process, it eats any of that last air that was in the bottle. So our beers can actually be cellared like a fine wine because there is no air in the bottle. You can put it in your cellar for 3 to 5 years and it will still be good.
The last stop in any beer making process is the bottling station. The brothers recently upgraded from a retrofitted toothpaste machine to this beast, which can push out thousands rather than hundreds of bottles per day.
So this is our big new bottling line over here. We're just finalizing the final touches on getting it calibrated so we can do our first test run. The old line we had was very limited and we could do on a good day 400 bottles in an hour, but more likely it was closer to 250.
Like you try to cram out 400 bottles within an hour? Like you guys were
You could do it if you got lucky,
Yeah,
but mostly it was a painful process.
It's over there, and it was actually built out of an old toothpaste filling machine.
Yes, it was designed for toothpaste, and we
So-
made it work.
Made it work.
But now we have this new fancy line that, in theory, can do almost 4,000 bottles an hour.
Heading back into the tap room, we sit down to go over the key ingredients involved in creating beer.
Walk me through what we got on the table. What are these interesting ingredients?
All right. So this is your standard barley malt. This is a roast barley malt. This is actually chocolate malt. This is Willamette hops, and this is Citra hops. So, on any given brew to create about 1,000 liters, we're probably using about, to do any beer that actually uses the chocolate malt, so let's say our stout, you're using probably close to 300 kilos of this, 15 to 25 kilos of chocolate malt, and that's what turns it from a clear beer like this to a black beer like a stout or Guinness. It only takes a little bit,
So it's like
less than 5%.
Really?
And then the hops, let's say we're doing the stout again versus an IPA. So a stout, you're probably using about 500 grams of hops at various times, whereas a big IPA super bitter, you're using probably maybe 3 kilos.
Wow.
So you're not using a lot and you get a big bang for your buck.
Yeah. So it's just there for accenting the brew, essentially.
Yeah.
Like could I create a brew without using hops? Is there anything like that out there?
Technically you can. Beer originally would not have had hops. It would have a different spice. It was usually gruit. But then the Catholic Church decided to tax gruit, which was a certain spice they use. So then they switched to hops. And then they found out
Really?
hops was also a preservative and made the beer last longer.
That is weird. Yeah.
So, and then legally through the LCBO, you can't sell a beer that doesn't have hops because it doesn't qualify as beer.
Really? What the fuck? That's
Yeah.
pretty interesting.
But that was about 300 years ago, the taxation things, and now every beer has hops because it's a legal requirement, let alone it's the expected flavor, but it's also because it's a preservative.
So what happens if you brew a beer without hops? You just classify as...
You To sell it through the LCBO, you could add a single kernel, so it's not going to do anything to the flavor, but you can say you add it, making it legal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's not going to taste what everyone expects a beer to taste like.
Of course.
Because Gruit is very different. There's a few breweries that have done them in the past. We will probably do one in the coming year. The difference between a good beer and bad beer is really understanding every aspect that you have control over. So when we make a brew sheet, it's not like a standard recipe. I put this in. It's all about I added this at this time at this temperature for this long to provide that exact same thing. You need to control every single aspect of it to end up with the same product. Otherwise, if you're, especially with like our Hefeweizen, if we fermented at 15 degrees Celsius and the next batch we fermented at 20 degrees Celsius, that 5 degrees difference will make it change from banana forward to coriander forward. Like, not coriander, clove. Banana to clove. It completely changes the flavor. It goes from nice and fruity to more like a bitter spice flavor. And that's just the 5 degree temperature. Everything you do up to that point is identical. If you ferment, let alone the 5 degree, but like a degree difference, there is a difference in the final product. And the difference between that is if you think about your chemistry from high school, warmer temperature, things vibrate faster, things are moving faster. Lower temperature, everything's slower. So in a lager fermentation, everything moves slower. So it learns how to break down the more complex sugars and then finishes with the simpler sugars. So it eats them all individually, but going slower, it learns how to break those down. Whereas in the higher one, they basically binge, eat all the really easy stuff to eat, get tired because everything's so easy, and then they stop eating those more complex sugars,
go into a
which
food
is
coma
basically a food coma
yeah.
and die. And that's what ends up with those. The ale flavors end up sweeter because there's still those complex sugars because the yeast didn't break it down. So it's technically, if you did the exact same recipe up to the yeast point, the lager one versus the ale one, the lager one would have a higher alcohol because it broke down more of those complex sugars and it would taste cleaner, whereas the ale would be slightly lower alcohol but would have more flavor because there's still residual sugar because it didn't break down those maltotriose and complex
it didn't go
sugars.
crazy. It just that's pretty cool. What do you enjoy brewing the most?
The most?
Yeah.
Beer. Yes. No. I'm really enjoying our Czech Pilsner right now and our Schwarzbier because they finish really clean. There's no off flavors. There's nothing weird to it. But I also really enjoy playing with the ale yeast and making the crazy IPAs by playing with the hops because then you get to really play with the different ingredients instead of just. I love having like one or two of the really nice IPA and then I can drink Pilsner the rest of the day.
Yeah.
I call them sessional beers, or the older school industry term is crushable. Is it crushable? Can you drink it all day? Can you crush a lot of them?
Yeah.
We're not allowed to use that word very often because it promotes over drinking.
Yes.
I see.
Yeah.
But if the beer is that good,
It is what it is.
then it is what it is.
Sessionable.
Like,
Yeah.
a Corona isn't a great beer, but if you're sitting on a beer in Mexico, it's a great beer.
Beach, you mean?
On the beach? What
You
is it?
said sitting on a beer.
Oh.
Why are you sitting on a beer in Mexico?
If you're sitting on a beach in Mexico, Corona's a great beer because it's where you are that matters and who you're with, which is kind of the whole idea between our Haven brand. Your Haven, no matter what you're doing, what you're drinking, it's important. It makes it more enjoyable.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Find your Haven, bring one of our beers with you and make it better.
Thanks, Andy. That's fair to do.
Yeah, not just one.
Cheers.
Take a 6-pack.
Cheers, gentlemen. Thank you for the tour.
No problem.
See you next week.